So I'm going to give you an example of a mediation analysis. And in this analysis, what we're going to look at is whether school cultural socialization is associated with interest in school. So cultural socialization refers to opportunities for students to learn about their own culture at school. And we're going to see if that's related to greater interest in school because school is then seen as more valuable or relevant. So there's this theory of culturally relevant teaching, the idea if you link teaching to students' cultures, then they're going to be more interested in school. And we think that might be because they find it more useful for their everyday life, which is what utility value is. So to run this analysis in process, we're just going to go to analyze regression, whichever version of process you have. Interest is going to be our dependent variable. Utility value is our mediator. And then cultural socialization is our independent variable. All right, so we're going to be using model 4. And here's where you can look at different options in process. So really the main option we have here is if we wanted to show the total effect model, that would give us path C, which since we're using bootstrap confidence intervals, we're not really interested in, but you can check that if you want. And then we could get our effect size and our standardized coefficients if we wanted as well. This would give us our beta values right here. Okay, so I'm not going to do any of those. For covariates, though, I will include age, gender, and then my race dummy variables here. And we're going to have the white group be the reference group. So they're left out. Okay, so then I just click OK, and we'll see how our mediation goes. So here's what process does. It takes a few minutes or so to run, slower depending on your software or your computer processing power. And then here's what we get. So just to double check that we have all the variables that we thought we did, we were looking at the cultural socialization, predicting interest through utility value. Now, one thing about process is that it only takes the first 8 letters of each variable name. So if you do have variables that are named very similarly, it's going to give you an error. Just one thing to watch out for. There we go. We've got our sample size. That looks correct. So here is our first regression. So remember, when we run mediation analysis, we get 2 regressions. One is predicting the mediator. So this is utility value, which is our mediator. So what we're looking for is path A, which is the independent variable predicting the mediator. So that's cultural socialization predicting utility value. And here we can see that the more cultural socialization students perceive, then the higher their utility value for school. All right, so that fits the, that's path A right there. That fits the first part of our thinking. And then this second regression here is going to give us path B and C prime. So path B is the mediator predicting the dependent variable. So that is utility value predicting interest right here. And so we can see that's 0.69. That's statistically significant. So we can see that the more utility value you have for school, the higher your interest in school. And then path C prime would be cultural socialization predicting interest when controlling for utility value, and that's right here. We can see that cultural socialization is positively related to interest, and that is also statistically significant. So since if we were doing the traditional way here, then we'd be in pretty good shape because all these paths are statistically significant so far, but we're doing a newer way, so we don't really care about statistical significance of each path. Instead, what we're interested in is that indirect effect. So down here, this is where we're going to get the indirect effect of X on Y. So that's cultural socialization on interest through utility value. So that's how you read this right here. And we can see the effect itself is 0.276. So that's the size of the effect. And then we get our bootstrap confidence interval, which is when we run those, run the same sample, so we get the same effect hundreds and thousands of times. In this case, we can see it's actually 5,000 times it ran that. And then we take the middle 95% of those values. The lowest value it got was 2.0 0.2267, and the highest value it got was 0.3282. What we're looking for is 0 to not be within this interval. It is definitely not. We have a pretty strong indirect effect here. So this would allow us to say that our mediation is significant. We saw that cultural socialization does predict interest, and we can say that utility value is a significant mediator of that relationship between cultural socialization and interest. So that's how you would interpret mediation model in process. So we can also run this in Stata. So let me pull Stata over here. And with Stata, we need to use our new code here. So I'm going to fill this in. This is cultural socialization predicting interest through utility value. So what we need to do is we need to change these variables right here. So our dependent variable is interest. Our independent variable is cultural socialization, which is just cultural in this data set. Right here. And then our mediator is utility value, which is utility underscore value. All right, so we can then, so we don't have to touch any of the rest of this because basically what we've done is replace the names of these variables with y, x, and m, so that it'll be within, whenever it refers to it in the rest of this code, it'll just be using those exact variables. Now I can highlight this and do it. It's going to do a lot for a minute, and then it's going to be silent for a little bit. That's what the quietly means. Just says run all these bootstraps without showing anything. So we're just going to sit and wait for a minute. All right, so that took about 2 minutes there. If you ever want to know whether Stata is still running or whether it's stuck, you can look over here. And if this stop sign is red, then that means it's still running. So that's a good way to check and make sure it hasn't, is still doing something you think it should be doing. All right, so first thing we're doing, we can ignore all of this up here, but you want to check the number of observations, so that's correct. So this is going to be a regression model just like before. Even though it's set up a little bit differently, it's still that same regression model. Oh, and this one I forgot to put my control variables, but you can still see how we have the effect of, these are going to be paths B and C prime here because their outcome is Y. So path B is the mediator to the dependent variable, so that's 0.69 here. Path C prime is from the independent variable to the dependent variable controlling for the mediator. So that's right here. Right? Again, we're seeing those positive relationships. And then path A is going to be our independent variable to the mediator. And again, so that's 0.4 right here. And then the part that gives us the indirect effect is going to be all the way down here. So unlike process, this doesn't give us, you know, all that other information about total effects and everything like that, but we do see the number of bootstrap replications that we did, 5,000 once again. And here we get that observed indirect effect, 0.2789, however many decimal points you want to go. Then we get our confidence interval, 0.23 to 0.33. So again, we would say that our indirect effect was 0.28, sorry. And then all of our confidence interval is above 0, so that would be significant mediation. Now, so these numbers are slightly different because I didn't include my control variables in here. But note that when you do run these bootstraps, every time you run it, you are possibly going to get different numbers, right? That's because it is a somewhat random process. Well, it is a random process where even though you're drawing from the same sample, you're not going to get the exact same numbers every single time. So if you are running the same mediation model multiple times, it's okay if, you know, the indirect effect changes very slightly, if the upper and lower limits of that confidence interval change slightly. That's just part of the randomness of bootstrapping, and that is perfectly fine. the idea of doing the bootstrapping, right, is you're trying to get, you know, what's the general idea of how big this effect is, right? So if it's over, if it's not, just if 0 is not within this confidence interval, then you're safe to say, okay, this is a significant mediation. And so just like in SPSS, what we found in Stata is that cultural socialization is significantly related to interest, and utility value does explain a significant portion of that variance in that relationship.